Okay, I've got a little bit of a nerdy one today, but it's really worth going into because I see this as something that looks like the future of maybe a communication standard. And really, it is, of course, designed to be the future communication standard for how we connect LLMs or kind of AI tools and agentic tools that we have in the future to all the stuff in the world. So I'm talking about something called MCP, Model Context Protocol. Lots of stuff. I'll get into it. This is just going to be a brief introduction to it. I'll do a couple videos later to go into more example usage of it and maybe even an enterprise concept on how you might use it in an enterprise business that has basically private environments, things like that. So this will be a little bit of a nerdy service, but at the same time, it might be worth just listening to, even if you have no interest. One of the interesting things about these things that move through the AI space, they come and go very quickly, but they usually leave a trail. And that trail is important for you to kind of get some context about what's next, how things happen, and then when something really needs to start interoperating with something else, you have some idea of what's going on, and you're kind of equipped to understand those new next paradigms that come. So I'll keep this one as light as I can. I'm going to run through a couple examples, very simple. I'll show you using one MCP and what it can do for you just conceptually. But first, I kind of want to run through really briefly what MCP is and what it means to have a protocol definition, those sorts of things. I'll keep it very high level, hopefully, so this shouldn't hopefully get too ugly in here, but it is kind of a future concept, and I really can't stress enough, something like what we're about to see, guaranteed, will be involved in the way that we communicate with these systems in the future. This might be thought of as something like an API in the current web world or a REST interface in the current web world. Those concepts, and you might not know those either, but these are fundamental concepts on how an application, even a website or an installed application or something like that, your apps on your phones, they all have to communicate back to a central application or service typically. To do that, they have to have some means to communicate back there. And very often that's a bespoke set of rules and communications. And that's kind of what we call an API today. So if we wanted to talk to Perplexity, Perplexity has a set of rules. You have to call me this way, tell me these things, and then I'll reply these things to you in this order, and it's up to you to unwrap that. And your application has to be aware of both sides of that kind of communication channel. So that's what we're going to go into. Again, that's about as deep as I'm going to get, I hope. I will cover a little bit of extra nerdy stuff for some of the people that might be interested in a little bit more depth so they can do self-reading before I get to the next videos, just to open the door for people that are interested in that space. But at this point, let's just jump in. This should be pretty quick, and it's just meant as information. Let's take a look at what MCP is all about. Okay, as I was mentioning, MCP, you can see it here, introducing Model Context Protocol. It was identified, it was kind of put forward by the Anthropic company back in November. It did make a splash back then, but it was kind of a nerdy splash, of course. People that were wondering how we might make AIs communicate to other tooling that lays around. If you've ever heard this concept, and maybe this is the first time you're hearing this, but if you've ever heard this idea of these AIs in the future will have the ability to reach out and use the services that you already use. I'll use a very easy one as an example. You use ChatGPT today, right? That's an easy one. It's great. It does a whole bunch of stuff. It keeps a little bit of information on you, but you also happen to use something like Notion. That's where you keep some documentation. Well, the problem with that, of course, is when you're in ChatGPT, you can't ask questions about your Notion data. And one day somebody would be able to write something inside of the application of ChatGPT to be able to connect to Notion and understand the full API that we were talking about, to get your data out, and that kind of thing. So that would be the typical path of enabling one application to talk to another. But really, actually, what we're interested in is not necessarily the application as much as the AI communication, which can be agentic or iterative. It can kind of do circles and ask multiple times of different things and ask again for more depth or search for more documents. So if I wanted to connect something like ChatGPT to kind of my Notion data, I might want a whole set of documents back there that it connects to, that I don't want 10,000 documents pulled into ChatGPT every time I ask a question, and it drops it into the context window, and then it's answering with a whole bunch of context that's unneeded. So the AI can figure out how to call Perplexity appropriately and say, oh, you know what I really need? I only need this information, or I need this information. That's already available through their API. That's already, Notion makes it available to say, if you call me this way and ask for this stuff, I'll search and give you back the things that are appropriate. But the AI has no way of knowing how to do that. So that's where this MCP thing comes from. I'm sorry for all that nerdiness for some of y'all that are just trying to get your head around this. I'll kind of get a little bit higher level than that. But basically the idea is, how do I get, when I'm communicating with an AI, give it the ability to talk to other tools that exist in the world? They may not be tools that you care about. They may just be, to you, things like in ChatGPT, it also searches the internet. That's essentially a tool. And in fact, I'm going to show you that exact pattern in Claude Desktop. Claude itself does not have the ability to search the internet. And I'm going to add that ability so that it can search the internet, in fact, using Perplexity. That's going to be our example. It's very easy and very kind of obvious example. It doesn't work particularly well, but that's a whole other thing I'm not trying to solve right now. Just trying to show you this idea of, with external tooling, it's not like it calls the external tool and just shows you the values. It's actually part of that whole AI thing. So I will ask the AI, hey, search the internet for something. And it will use this tool and say, you're the guy that knows how to search the internet. Give me the results back. It will take those results and then give it to the AI. It'll send it over to Claude and say, now look through this and answer the question that was being asked. And that's what's fascinating here. So we're really using AI over the top of all this other data. So people are talking about this model context protocol. Let's go through it real quickly. Back in November, it was introduced, and they're saying it's a standard for connecting AI assistants to systems where the data lives. And I think that undersells it actually a little bit. A lot of people are seeing it as a way to say, this is the thing that allows it to connect to your database. And in fact, of course, my first example was talking to Notion, and you could imagine it as where your data lives. But it's really actually just a communication mechanism so that AIs can actually talk to anything that's out there, And all of a sudden, we can start creating this concept of AI knows about all of the tools that already exist without having to be coded with those APIs to understand how to make those connections. A neat thing about this MCP that we'll get into in the future videos is, and in fact, the way that a lot of the tooling works, thanks to kind of LangChain early definitions of these kinds of things, AI is given a set of tools by developers who say, here's 3 things you can do. They're external tools. Here's a little calculator tool. You can use it when you need to do math. Here's a search tool. And that's all we basically say to it. We don't actually tell it, here's how you call it. Here's the API points. Here's what you need to send it, the type of data. Here's what you'll get back. You'll need to parse it this way. We simply give it a name and a description that's relatively descriptive to what it's doing. And an agentic system, so these smart LLMs that we're dealing with these days, kind of listen to all of that context. It would be like books on a shelf. And it goes, okay, I have a book there that tells me about animals, and I have a book over there that tells me about flowers. Okay, got it. So when someone comes in the house and asks me about flowers and which one is my favorite, I might have to go read that book first. I don't know anything in it. That's really what's happening here, is this ability to very simply, tremendously simply, I'll actually show you the connection mechanism, describe a tool by saying, here is a very simple interface. You call it and say, can you tell me about yourself? That's what the LLM does when it knows about one of these MCP servers. So, okay, I keep telling you I'm not going to go into the nerdy stuff. I apologize. I know I have a habit. So I'm going to try to pull it back up and say, just think of it as the way to make your LLM connect to tools. That might be data like they describe here. It says it provides a universal open standard for connecting AI systems with data sources, replacing fragmented integrations with a single protocol. And this just basically means instead of each team having to figure out how to expose their data to different LLMs, and every new LLM that comes online, they have to go work with them, they're saying if everybody just writes it this way, we can all agree that's how I ask for things, and this is how you reply. So it's basically a syntax protocol is what I call it. It's how the two parts need to talk to each other. And that's all. It's not really a networking protocol or some of these HTTP kind of things that you've heard about. It's a very simple one that says, you say this, I say that. That allows us to communicate. It says the result is simpler, more reliable way to give AI systems access to the data that they need. All right, we've been describing that. So I'm going to very quickly bounce into kind of the specification doc. Don't worry, I will do my best. I swear I'm trying. I'm really trying. I'll do my best to stay really high level just to describe what they have over there. So this is the place that some of the other people that might want a little more depth can easily dive in. So go check out this link and it'll take you to this document. All right, so I think that they've done a great job of documentation here. I think it's very clear, would be very easy to implement. And this has some really wonderful examples and kind of implementation details here. But basically, I'll show you the diagram that they have. They're basically saying, this would be your ChatGPT, this is your Claude desktop. It is told about different servers. You'll see that in a second. And those servers basically have some number of tools inside of them. So basically some number of actions they can take. You can create something, you can delete something, you can search for something. Those would be essentially different tools that they have. And that way it keeps the AI aware of kind of an atomic level of information it could get instead of saying, I don't know, the IMDb service. I'm going to call it every time somebody mentions a movie because maybe it has something to do with this. The more atomic allows the system to say, only when they're saying they want to look up an actor, and I have a tool that says this is how you look up actors for movies, will it actually make that call? And actually we'll get to see it make that call in just a second here. The other thing that was useful here is if you look into the tools definition itself, it has a very good definition of how these conversations need to occur back and forth between the service that's kind of, or the client system that's saying, I want to add you as a tool, I've been told about you, and the service that hosts that tool that needs to say, oh, and these are the things I can do for you. All right, let's move on to the next. Another thing that Anthropic put down was a very nice set of templated systems, kind of example systems for you to be able to move through. And I won't spend much time here because I understand for a lot of people, GitHub is not the place they want to be staring at. But this is kind of the best place for people to come and look for information about MCPs. And it is also linked off of that original document because this is all part of their original drop. But in here, I want to show you how many servers they already have built to describe how to create certain kinds of things. And you can just go into each one of these. It's in a repository. You can check it out and have it yourself and see how they integrated each one of their tools and created an MCP out of them. But there's just tons of them. JetBrains and Grafana and Riza, let's see, Atlassian, Calendar, Chat MCP. It's just DeepSeek R1. They have tons. And really what we're looking at, this is a weird list of just a whole bunch of services and actions and those kinds of things. But what you're looking at is functionality that you would be able to give to Claude Desktop, for example. Now we're talking about Claude Desktop because it's by Anthropic. Anthropic is the team, of course, that brought MCPs forward as well. They're proposing this whole thing. But since they own both halves, they've built their own, what would be their Claude website where you can kind of do the ChatGPT thing. They've made that a desktop application also. And in that desktop application, you can go to the developers tabs in the settings to say, here's some MCPs that I want to install. If you had access or you download one of these and run one of these servers locally, then you'll gain access to these kinds of functions. That doesn't mean that you'll automatically be able to do these things. You might still have to have API keys or something to prove that you have rights to call these services. Of course, that's just standard practice. But it does mean that within Claude, you can probably, if you install this DeepSeek R1 server, you can probably start calling DeepSeek for certain requests, as inceptic as that becomes. Is that a word? Inceptic? I guess it is now. So in any case, this is a place that you can go to. There are other places as well that have a big list, searchable, kind of curatable. There's tons and tons of these coming. And the reason I show this, and 11 Labs, here's a good example. So 11 Labs is a way that you can get, very traditionally what 11 Labs is all about is audio, like some kind of text to speech. If you have a script and you want an actor or an AI actor to read it, they're very good at that. Definitely go look at them. They have a lot of other utilities as well these days. But if you wanted to be able to get the audio file back automatically while you were chatting with Claude, you would then be able to just set this up, put your API key in it, and you could then do 11 Labs things and ask for things from 11 Labs within Claude. That's the idea. And the reason I point out this big list of craziness is to show you how fast this is going. Anybody that has a service, anybody that has data, anybody that has functionality that users like to use, those are the places that are going to start putting up these MCPs because they're tremendously simple to put up. They're just a protocol of communication, again, as I talked about. So it's easy for systems to say, oh, I have an API. Well, I could also create an MCP that people could call, or other people can create these. These are mostly created by individuals that have gone and written the MCP because there isn't one for IMDb yet. I'll just write one myself and I'll post it here. If you run it yourself on some service, then you can talk to IMDb with Claude Desktop ostensibly, and other tools that are supporting MCP. All right, I'll get off that, but this is really just to show you this is huge, and this gets back to this core point that I want to talk about. So I'm back out here just for a second to say, I know I'm breaking my promises left and right too. I apologize. I'm trying to stay as nerdless as possible on this one, but this one's really important. This one might be seen as a missing link to the way that we might even be able to do commerce. So the idea of all of these AIs and these agentic systems at some point, there's a dream where we build all of these awesome agentic systems and they start doing microtransactions on our behalf. So example, you've seen computer use and other things, other systems that can kind of control a browser and do things on your behalf. We will certainly move in that route as well. But at some point, it might be less about doing that absolute control for you and something like I am typing in OpenAI or a ChatGPT saying, I really wish this is a cool image. I wish I could turn it into a video. And a little thing that comes back and says, sure, we have 5 services. Are you a member of any of them? No? Would you like to say, pay 3 cents for this video? That kind of microtransaction suddenly becomes possible with an agreed upon communication mechanism. And once we start doing things like that, you start talking about having the internet at your fingers in a single location. Unlike today where you have to go to Amazon and go to different locations to do things, you'll still be able to do that, by the way. I'm not advocating this is the answer. It's just it brings some of those things much closer to you in a place that you might be asking questions. Oh, I didn't buy dog food. I need to get some new dog food. Something like this chat system could solve this. And of course, it doesn't need to be a chat system. It might be your lamp that you talk to or whatever it is that now has a mechanism to do this microtransaction, but it needed some kind of transport protocol. So that's all this is kind of saying is if these systems become very simple to couple together and they self-find, so in other words, nobody has to program anything other than putting this MCP up. Nobody has to tell the LLM how to use it. That's the real trick. So I'm really, really excited about this stuff. I now want to just jump into kind of showing you this thing in use. That's the most exciting part, but it's also very lightweight. I'm not going to go into depth here. Next videos, I'll go into a little more depth on it. So I know I keep promising that. I'm sorry. Let's dive back in and let's look at a very simple example of it not working, us putting up an MCP server, and then it working. Okay, here we are, Claude Desktop. I've just launched Claude Desktop here. And what I'm showing you is the mostly stock Claude Desktop. I happen to have one tool. The knowable viewers will know that I have one tool already installed here, but we'll get to that in a second. I don't want to spoil the surprise. So here I just want to ask a simple question, and I've grown to hate typing. So let's give this a shot. Hey, can you search the internet and tell me the 5 hottest movies that are available for streaming and have kind of recently released? And of course, as mentioned, Claude doesn't have the availability to get to the internet. It's just one of their missing links. They're moving forward on that. I just heard Dario Modi talk about that the other day. They're definitely moving forward and understand this is a major gap. But until they close this, of course, Claude is a little less useful to at least me in the way that I've started using ChatGPT. So this is a big miss. However, what if I had the flexibility to be able to add search to it? Warning, as I told you before, this is going to be pretty low fidelity. It's not going to be fantastic, but it absolutely will give us search results. So let's close Claude Desktop, because as we install this new server, it needs to launch. It checks for these new servers, these MCPs, when it launches. So let's close Claude Desktop first. Head over to, happens to be in Cursor. I am going to take this little block. I already have a server that we're inside of that is my MCP search server. It happens to have a Perplexity tool or set of tools in it. So I'm just going to save this, and that's enough. This server's, it's not running, it's just sitting there. And what Claude is told with this line is, I know about this new tool. I've just edited, by the way, I've just edited the Claude desktop config file. So this is actually the config file that Claude desktop uses. For any of the nerds out there trying to figure out how to make this work, you need to go find the Claude desktop file itself. It's within the Claude environment. That's where you're defining. It's also, I think, a configurable button in the developer settings in Claude Desktop. But in any case, so what I'm really doing is adding a kind of a mention of a server, really a command to run the server in this case, to Claude. So when it launches, it runs both of these. So let's take a look. All right, so now we have Claude running once again. No difference, doesn't look like, but there really is. This was a 1 before. This is the thing that I didn't want to spoil. So there's a little indicator down here of the different MCP tools that are available. And so this is the tools that have come in. There was a 1 before, so 6 tools just came in by me adding this one server. Now, of course, easy way to define it is an MCP server is a collection of one to n sets of tools. And each one of those tools comes out as a definition. And you don't have to worry about the details as much as it may not just be one thing. You don't have to run one server for one tool. You might be able to pack a bunch of tools inside of one server, depending upon how you're structured, how they're being hosted. So if you look inside of this, you can see that a lot of these say MCP Perplexity on them. So that's the system that we were just in. And so we have a chat with Perplexity, check deprecated code with Perplexity, find APIs with Perplexity, get documentation with Perplexity. And I'll be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure how to ask these questions. I could probably just kind of poke around in Claude and ask a few of these questions, but I have searched with Perplexity in the past, so I'll just do exactly what we did last time. That seems safe. Hey, can you search the internet and get me some maybe 5 awesome movies that maybe recently released that are available for streaming? And so what Claude's going to come back and say, oh, I'd be happy to do that. Now that's the big change, right? That's huge, that we just added a feature to Claude that Claude literally does not have. That's very exciting, and imagine how far that might be able to go. But it's coming up and saying, hey, we found this tool. Are you sure you want to run it? This is just one of their safety precautions at this point, so you don't get a bunch of extra tools and it doing things you didn't want it to. And I'm going to allow it for this chat. And so you'll also be able to see this is the query and the message structure that it's sent off over to that server saying, oh, here's the query, please run this. And what will come back is some response. And what I've seen of this, and we may get to watch it here yet again, I don't know if it'll work the same way this time. What I've seen is it came back and the results actually come back. So there's a bunch of results in here. Oh, it did it last time. This came back pretty much this same kind of looking block. So this is what the server is responding. So that server is responding with all of this information, though it just reformatted on us. But it sent back this blob of information that is saying, here's all this stuff back. The first time it came back and Claude said, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that worked. I'm going to have to make the search again. You can see it kind of do its agentic thing, saying, no, that didn't quite work. Let me call a tool again. And it called it 5 times in a row before it spread out the details like this. So this is not terribly low fidelity. It doesn't give us the URLs back, a bunch of things that are missing. Obviously more to figure out here. I'm not exactly sure the best way to do that. I could look inside of this tool to make sure that the URLs are coming back with the results and it's not just the results. I don't really know. But in any case, you can imagine now how you might extend any tools. Right now, we're talking about Claude Desktop. What's likely, very likely to happen, it may not be MCP. It's okay if it is. It's fine if it is. If it's not and it needs to be something else, that's also fine. It's one of the reasons we're talking about this. Hang on. Let me meet you out there. Okay, so the idea of this MCP, you can imagine it's extending ChatGPT or Claude Desktop or X or I mean, I do know it's called Grok. I don't know why I couldn't find that one. Sorry. Okay. Or Grok or any of the other models that are the obvious place that you see AI living, but also tools like Cursor that we were just in. It uses MCPs. Windsurf uses MCPs, and other tools that use agentic intelligence might be the right way to think of it, which just means it's not single shot intelligence, has the ability to kind of iterate over a solution until it's done. That's kind of what we're looking for. Those are the ones where MCPs work, because it's going to have to say, what tools do I have? Oh, I don't need those. I'll make the response and I'll give it back to, oh, this time you're asking a question. I do need to use the tool. And that's that agentic thing that you might be hearing a lot about. It's really just this concept of theoretically non-hard sequential set of steps that the intelligence of the system itself can determine if it's finished with its work before it puts the output out. And these MCPs are useful in those systems. A lot of systems are going to get more and more agentic in that way. And so this suddenly can start to expand and allow us to put kind of flexibility and functionality in systems that absolutely did not have intelligence before and certainly didn't have outreach to tons and tons of services. So this might broaden well beyond something like a chat client. You might have a dumb client today relative to intelligence that you then put some intelligence into just so you can get connection to Notion data or connection to your bank or whatever else. That might really become a mechanism, a portal for connectivity between applications and services in the future in general. So keep an eye out for this MCP thing. It's actually a really big deal, or something like it. And we've been needing it for a while. It's now catching fire a little bit. You'll see a lot more people talking about it because I think we're starting to really come to grips with what it's doing. So I hope this wasn't terrible. I hope this wasn't too deep. I just wanted to introduce you to it. Even if you're not interested in the nerdy side of this, this is a story that's worth saying, okay, how do we make the services talk together? We needed something. I understand now. There's this stuff that's making it connect. MCP just happens to be the terminology that we're using today, but there's still that thing that makes them connect. So again, how'd I do? Was this really, really, really high level? I hope it was. I'm sorry. I honestly, truly, I've honestly tried. This is my best effort. All right. Well, thanks for coming along on the ride with this one, and I'll see you in the next one.